County Sheriff says they found the body of a woman along the dirt road of 1441. Now, let me tell you, this morning, 19-year-old Stacy Lee Stites was reported missing and never arrived at work.
In 2006, a small documentary film team helped expose how an innocent man ended up on Texas's death row.
But my personal opinion when I heard that she had been killed was that Fennell had done it immediately. And I know a number of people around here that felt the same way.
It soon became apparent that the case against Rodney Reed was not just a small-town affair.
And I believe the state knew about it. I believe the district attorney, the Bastrop, knew about it. I believe the sheriff's department knew about it. And I believe the Bastrop Police Department knew about it. And I do believe they covered that up. They did not want a fellow officer implicated.
In the past 13 years, the evidence has continued to mount in favor of Rodney Reed's innocence.
A Georgetown police sergeant is spending the night behind bars. Jimmy Fennell Jr. is accused of sexually assaulting a woman he detained.
His guilty pleas today could play a major role in the appeal process of convicted murderer Rodney Reed.
Key witnesses have recanted crucial testimony.
Did Roberto Bayardo make missteps that hindered justice in some of the most high-profile crimes? A man within days of execution now awaiting word of an appeal after Bayardo clarified his conclusions on when that woman died.
Key law enforcement officials who oversaw the initial investigation have been charged and convicted for their own misconduct.
The man who oversaw the Reed investigation, Bastrop Sheriff Richard Hernandez, who also turned out to be a dirty cop and pled guilty to 6 felonies.
In critical scientific medical evidence has been discovered that essentially exonerates Rodney Reed.
She had been face down for 5 or more hours in one position before she was turned over to the new position. She was dead around midnight. She was already dead.
Yet instead of exonerating Reed or even retrying him under fair conditions, the Texas courts have decided to set a November 20th execution date for this year.
State prosecutors are now asking to execute convicted murderer Rodney Reed.
The amount of injustice wrought against Rodney Reed in this case is impossible to measure, and the fact that the state continues to seek his execution defies common sense and human decency. On the morning of May 6, 1998, Dr. Roberto Bayardo, Travis County, Texas medical examiner, told a lie. He was testifying during the trial of Rodney Reed for the capital murder of a local 19-year-old girl, Stacy Stites. When asked by Special Prosecutor Lisa Tanner approximately what time he believed the victim to have died, he answered around 3 a.m. on April 23, 1996. A few years later, I asked him how he came up with that specific time at trial. In your trial testimony, you said that time of the death was around 3 a.m. Do you remember how you could have came to that conclusion?
We know when she was last seen and we know when the body was found, so we have a precise time.
So Dr. Bayardo's testimony regarding the victim's time of death was based on the word of Stacy's live-in boyfriend and fiancé and local police officer, Jimmy Fennell, who told police she would have left their apartment around 3 a.m. to go to work. Dr. Bayardo's estimated time of death was not based on any actual medical science.
Usually the first question the police officer and investigators want to know is when did she die, because that will influence the investigation of whom to interview and who's telling the truth and who isn't. This is something that all medical examiners and coroners learn immediately, is that there's certain changes in the body that indicate how long somebody's been dead.
Dr. Michael Baden is one of the nation's foremost authorities in forensic pathology. He was a former chief medical examiner for New York City, and he was appointed the chairman of the United States Forensic Panel that investigated the deaths of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King. He has performed over 20,000 autopsies throughout his decades-long career. After reviewing the autopsy and crime scene video, Dr. Baden, along with 2 other renowned pathologists, concluded that the victim had died much earlier than Dr. Bayardo had testified, most likely well before midnight on April 22nd.
In my opinion, to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, she was dead before midnight of the day, the next day that she was found. She was dead around midnight. She was already dead.
Experts also noted it appeared obvious that the body had been moved at least 3 to 4 hours after the murder by looking at telltale signs of the body's condition.
The appearance of Stacy Stites' body at the scene where she was found later that afternoon, around 3 o'clock that afternoon, which shows a pinkish red color on the front areas of her body that are due to what's called lividity, the settling of blood by gravity after death. And in this instance, there was fixed lividity on the front of her body, and that would indicate that she had been face down for 5 or more hours in one position before she was turned over to the new position.
Lividity, or the gravitational pooling of red blood cells, is a basic forensic indicator of what happened to the body after death. Yet neither rookie field analyst Karen Blakely nor Dr. Bayardo made any mention of this evidence, which is clearly obvious in the crime scene tape.
This is the right hand, and it shows that she's laying face up and hand up, but the lividity is inappropriate because that only developed when the hand was down, when the hand and forearm were in a downward position. So it would support the conclusion that she was laying face down, the hand and the arm were face down for at least 4 or 5 hours in order for this to still be there. One can see in the tips of the fingers pale whiteness in the second, third, fourth, and fifth fingers, and that's because at the time she was laying face down elsewhere, the fingers were against an object which pressed out the lividity, so it gives some information as to her being face down with a hand down for many hours before she was moved to this position.
And finally, the experts agreed that the type and amount of bodily fluids found on the floor of the pickup truck that Stacy and Jimmy Fennell shared, which was found abandoned 8 miles away in a local high school parking lot, was indicative of her being placed and kept in that truck 3 or 4 hours after she had been killed.
And that mucoid type fluid would have come out of her nose and mouth, which is an early part of the decomposition process after we die. This takes 3 or 4 hours to develop under these conditions she was in.
That time period would make Jimmy Fennell the one and only person who could have killed her, for he testified that he and Stacy were alone in their apartment from 8 p.m. until 3 a.m. on the night that she was killed. The earlier time of death and the proof of movement of the body hours after the murder completely exonerates Rodney Reed, who, by the state's own admission and Jimmy Fennell's testimony, would not have had access to the victim for that long or anywhere near that time period. None of this basic forensic analysis was ever completed by Dr. Bayardo, but without credible medical testimony or an expert of his own, Rodney Reed was at the mercy of Bayardo's lie. Circumstances surrounding Bayardo's involvement in the autopsy of Stacy Stites indicates that he may well have been incentivized to testify in favor of the prosecution.
We found making money could be at the root of the problem.
A 2016 investigative report by Austin's KXAN news team uncovered a decades-long scheme by Bayardo to increase his salary by conducting out-of-county autopsies and pocketing the proceeds. Stacy Stites was one of those autopsies.
An analysis of Bayardo's near 3 decades in office shows he consistently performed between 395 and 823 autopsies a year. Over time, Bayardo raked in around $2.6 million performing autopsies for 45 other counties.
Despite Bayardo's lack of credibility and his conflict of interests, and his own signed statement that now recants his original time of death estimate, Texas courts have refused to even consider the alternative evidence brought forth by Dr. Bodden.
Dr. Bodden free to leave?
Yes,
I bet he has more important things to do. this is important. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Your Honor.
The state of Texas is facing growing calls to halt the execution of Rodney Reed, an African-American man who spent over 20 years in prison for a rape and murder he says he did not commit. A group of 26 Texas lawmakers, including both Democrats and Republicans, penned a letter this week asking Governor Greg Abbott to stop the execution planned for November 20th. More than 1.4 million people have signed an online petition to save Reed's life. Supporters include celebrities Kim Kardashian West, Rihanna, and Meek Mill. Rodney Reed was sentenced to die after being convicted by an all-white jury for the 1996 murder of Stacey Stites, a 19-year-old white woman. The two were having an affair at the time. But substantial evidence has since emerged implicating Stites' fiancé, a white police officer named Jimmy Finnell, who was later jailed on kidnapping and rape charges in another case. In a major development, a man who spent time in jail with Finnell signed an affidavit last month asserting that Finnell had admitted in prison he killed his fiancée because she was having an affair with a black man.
So local law enforcement officer Jimmy Finnell, who's engaged to Stacey Stites, was the prime suspect for months. They knew it was not Finnell's semen in the body, but they still believed that he was a suspect. He was actively interrogated, and after he failed a second polygraph test on facts about the murder, he invoked his right to silence and refused to cooperate. That investigation, however, stopped after Mr. Reed's semen was identified, and suddenly Jimmy Finnell was no longer their suspect, and Jimmy Finnell was no longer their suspect, and Rodney Reed was prosecuted and then ultimately sentenced to death.
And so the alternative theory of what happened with the rookie cop, Jimmy Finnell, the fiancé of Stacey Stites, was what happened that night.
Well, and so every piece of evidence that we've found over the course of 20 years now points to Jimmy Finnell. It points to the fact that the law enforcement officers investigating this case who suspected Finnell were right. When you look at Finnell's background, he had a history of excessive force even prior to the murder. His girlfriend right after the murder described him as emotionally abusive, virulently racist, and
he's white and Rodney Reed is black.
Yes. And so the idea of an interracial relationship would not be something he would like.
And didn't someone quote Stacey as saying that he told her he would kill her if she was ever unfaithful?
Yes, in fact, that's something we've heard from several witnesses now. And as we've looked into this case, we've always suspected things about Jimmy Finnell from the beginning. I took this case in 2002, and lo and behold, several years later, I pick up the newspaper and we find out that Jimmy Finnell had been arrested. And ultimately he was prosecuted and pled guilty to crimes related to kidnapping and raping a woman while he was on patrol. And when the Texas Department of Public Safety investigated Jimmy Finnell, they found that this was not a one-off incident, that there was a pattern going back years. And so here we have the defense, which was woefully unprepared, did not have the time to present a case, and now we know everything about that defense. Everything that Rodney Reed was saying has, in fact, been shown to be true.
Murder deep in the Lost Pines of Texas. The half-dressed body of a woman. Strangled. Who killed Stacey Stites?
Based on the evidence, who do you think is responsible for your sister's murder?
Rodney Reed. The state says Rodney Reed raped and then killed Stacey. A jury agreed, convicting him of her murder. Reed was sentenced to death.
Do you think Rodney Reed was given a fair trial? Yes or no?
Yes, definitely.
But many across the country are beginning to wonder, did Texas convict the wrong man? Stacey's sisters Deborah and Crystal exclusively tell Crime Watch Daily they are convinced of his guilt.
He should be on death row.
Yes. Absolutely.
He should be executed.
Yes, he should.
Without a doubt.
No doubt whatsoever. He is guilty.
On death row nearly 22 years, Rodney Reed just days away from execution.
I'm innocent of this case. Absolutely innocent.
Reed's case now attracting attention from a growing list of celebrities, and over 1 million people have signed an online petition to stop his execution. Reed, now 51, was convicted of raping and killing 19-year-old Stacy Stites in a small Texas town in 1996. Reed's semen found inside her body. You told the police you didn't know her.
That was the worst mistake I've ever could have made. And I did not want to be incriminated in relation to her death.
Stites, one of several women prosecutors say Reed sexually attacked, allegations never proven. Reed now says he and Stites had a discreet, intimate relationship, and that this man, Jimmy Finnell, then Stites' fiancé and a police officer, is the real killer.
The evidence points directly in that direction.
Well, the evidence points directly at you because
that was created from the state's narrative of this whole situation.
Reed's lawyers point to developments since his 1998 conviction. Witnesses who say Finnell made threatening and racist statements about the affair.
And it has taken years, an extraordinary effort to break through this bias in that community.
Forensic analysis raising doubts about basic facts like the time and place Stites was killed. And a former prison inmate says Finnell bragged about killing Stites while Finnell served a 10-year prison sentence for improper sexual activity with another woman. Stites' sisters stand by Reed's conviction.
Never have we thought that Jimmy was guilty of murdering my sister, ever.
Her other sister, Crystal, adding, "We pray for the end to a nightmare we have had to relive over and over for 23 years. The Texas Attorney General's office says after reviews by more than 20 judges, it's time to see that justice is done at last.
I'm cautiously optimistic that something good has got to happen.
My name's Alicia Slater, and I worked at the HEB in Bastrop from 1995 to 1996 before I graduated high school. I knew Stacy Sink. She was a year or two older than me, and didn't work in the same department or anything. I was just the bagger and the cart girl outside mostly, but we just knew each other through work, and we had lunch together in the break room quite often.
Proof of a pre-existing consensual sexual relationship between Rodney Reed and Stacy Stites would be a key exonerating piece of evidence in his case, for proving the relationship would provide a reasonable explanation to why a small amount of Reed's sperm was found on the victim. In fact, in a 2012 denial of Rodney Reed's appeal, Texas Court of Criminal Appeals Judge Andrew W. Austin wrote that Reed's claim of a consensual relationship is effectively the beginning and end of his assertion of innocence. Austin further stated that all witnesses to this relationship had been friends and associates of Rodney Reed and not of Stacy Stites, and therefore were unreliable. Finally, Austin wrote that because Reed's claim that he had an affair with Stacy Stites does not have credible evidentiary support, his claims of actual innocence is doomed. But what if such a witness existed?
There was one instance where we were having lunch in the break room together, and it was just the two of us, and she pretty much was confiding in me. We were talking about her engagement ring, and I was like, "Oh, are you so excited to get married?" And she said she really wasn't so excited to get married, and quickly followed that with saying that she was actually sleeping with a black guy named Rodney, and that she was, not sure what her fiance would do if he found out, and she had to be pretty careful about it. So she wasn't really excited about getting married because she was sleeping with a black dude named Rodney, she said.
I was only 19 at the time. So I was like, "Where do you live?" And he said, "On Main Street." And in my mind, Main Street's this big lit up road. So I was like, "Oh, well, how far?" And he said, "1 mile or 2."
Linda drove and says when he tried guiding her down a dirt road, she refused and turned the car around.
The next thing I know, he has me by the back of my hair, slamming my face on my steering wheel.
Linda says she kept trying to fight back.
And I asked him, I was like, "What do you want? What the hell do you want from me?" And he said, "I want a blowjob." And I said, "You'll have to kill me before you get anything from me." And he said, "I guess I have to kill you then."
Still fighting, Linda says he tried to take her in the car, but when she saw lights approaching, she jumped out and says he took off in her car, leaving her to run for help.
They called the cops came, and I identified who it was, exactly what he was wearing, where I picked him up, what time it was.
According to prosecutors, earlier in the night, a Bastrop officer had noticed Reed near the gas station wearing the clothes Linda had described. They placed Reed in a photo lineup.
I knew immediately who it was. Immediately. I picked him out immediately. No doubt at all.
And that night is what would lead police to connect Rodney to Stacy's case. Similar MOs, prosecutors say. Linda's car left close to where Stacy's truck was found. They also think Stacy may have been stopped near the same gas station.
We believed Stacy was abducted from that place. We knew that there was a struggle inside of her truck based on the condition of her truck, based on the abrasions that were found on her body.
Suspecting they may be connected, police tested Reed's DNA against the semen found in Stacy, and it matched. After months of investigating, police believed they had found their killer.
We heard first about Rodney Reed when they called and said, "We have a suspect and we think it's him."
They questioned Reed in jail for a drug charge, and he denied knowing Stacy at all. But when police confronted him with the DNA evidence, he claimed they had had consensual sex days before, saying it was a secret since Stacy had been engaged.
All of this talk about Stacy Stites having this clandestine affair with Rodney Reed only came up after he was linked to by DNA, which we later learned in looking at the case was precisely the argument that he made back in the previous case in Wichita Falls.
Tanner is referring to Rodney Reed's first charge for sexual assault. A young white woman told police she was raped and beaten. Officers took this photo of her injuries after the incident. Reed said it was consensual and she was hiding the relationship because he was black. A jury acquitted Reed, but he would go on to face several more charges of sexual assault, including the rape of a 12-year-old girl in Bastrop. Reed's DNA, according to the Attorney General's office, matched several unsolved rape cases. 4 cases are still pending, but Reed was already under arrest for capital murder, so those 4 rape cases were never tried.
No, I was going to say I appreciate that paper. Okay. Yeah. There's a lot of people that knows that, you know what I'm saying? All right. Well, it wasn't until on that day, the day that you're talking about, that she was found. It wasn't until a few days later that I knew anything about it, and I had to recall where I had been, and I knew that I was at my cousin's. I was at my house, went to my cousin's house, went back to my house, then I went to work. Yes, there is. My cousin Chris, well, we was working together at the person that can verify that is Chris Aldridge. We worked together we was working at the Super S grocery store, remodeling. Well, basically we was resetting the store, the grocery store at that time. My cousin Shantae, she's a cousin on one side of the family, and Chris is the cousin on the other side. What went through my mind when I found out was I really couldn't believe that it had happened until I actually saw it on the news. I was kind of lost the words, you know what I'm saying, kind of upset, you know. No, not at that time. At the time, I wasn't thinking about me possibly being a suspect in this case because I'm innocent. I had nothing to do with it. I knew nothing about it until a few days later. Well, yeah, she mentioned to me about, you know, we talked about kind of, so we didn't get into detail about their relationship, but she told me about her and Fennell and that their relationship. Hold on. Excuse me.
What part of the stay at?
I live on A part, 845.
Oh.
Sorry about that. Yeah, she told me about the relationship and all, and as far as him, he was angry because he did know. He knew, and she told me that if he actually found out, her words to me were that he would kill her, and I didn't take it as serious, you know how some people say, oh, I'll kill you, you're just playing around or something like that, I didn't take that he would literally, you know what I mean? And next thing you know, she comes up dead. I thought that he may have had something to do with it, but it wasn't until after when I got, I don't want to say I got arrested, because I went up to the jailhouse to see what all this mess was about, because they said that they were looking for me, and they said that they were looking for me for delivery of drugs and all this stuff here. So and I knew that all this was lies. This was a year later, and I went on up to the jail, and Chef Hernandez, he told me that they had a warrant for me for delivery of cocaine, and I wanted to know why, who, when, and all this other stuff, right? It wasn't until the next day, he told me that I couldn't make bond, even though he said that they preset a bond, but he said I couldn't make bond until after I got magistrated. And when they took me into this interrogation room and they started questioning me about this, and I told them, I said, well, look, I don't mind giving you samples or whatever, but I want an attorney present. At that time, they kind of slowed down off of the interrogation and changed the whole proceeding. Next thing you know, they was taking me before a judge and charging me with the crime. It wasn't until after I got the attorney that my family hired, Jimmy Brown, that I found out about these other police officers have, suspects and stuff like that. Then when I found out about them being suspects, the ideal about Fennell and all of them started, it was kind of like coming together to me, but I just couldn't, I still couldn't place it. But like I said, because I knew nothing about it, I didn't know who actually done what, because you got 3 police officers that are suspects, and then then there was like 28, I think, other suspects, so I didn't know where to go with this, except for, getting an attorney and trying to figure something out. The reason why I said that was at the time, like I said, I was charged with delivery of cocaine, and this is why I was in jail. And all of a sudden, while doing the interrogation, I'm thinking that I'm going to be interrogated about the drugs. I asked Officer Board, David Board, I asked him, I said, where's the drugs and where's the informant? And he said, we'll get to that. And then he reached down his side in his little briefcase, and he showed me a picture of Stacy. And I'm like, how can they flip this from a drug charge, now he showed me a picture of Stacy. I'm like, wait a minute, I don't know nothing about that. I don't know her, I don't know nothing, because I didn't want to be a part of this investigation. I didn't want to had nothing to do with it, That's the reason why I wasn't as forthcoming, with them.
I know that I'm innocent.
This morning, a stay for convicted killer Rodney Reed just days before his execution, as new evidence raises questions about his guilt after sitting on death row for more than 20 years. 51-year-old Reed was to die by lethal injection on Wednesday for the 1996 murder of 19-year-old Stacy Stites, who prosecutors say he raped as she traveled to work in a town 30 miles outside Austin, her body dumped on the side of this rural road. Texas's top criminal appeals court Friday halting the execution after facing tremendous public outcry from lawmakers.
There is a mountain of evidence pointing in another direction.
And celebrities such as Beyonce, Oprah Winfrey, and Kim Kardashian West, who met Reed yesterday in prison and was with him when he got the news of the stay. She posted this photo on Instagram, writing, "Words cannot describe the relief and hope that swept over the room in that moment." The case now going back to the trial court. The Innocence Project filing a lawsuit requesting further DNA testing of crime scene evidence, which they say prosecutors have denied.
Wouldn't you want a new trial if you were Rodney Reed? All we're asking for is just what's right.
In a jailhouse interview with our Deborah Roberts in October, Reed reiterated his innocence.
this case will itself exonerate me.
Why? Why are you so convinced?
Because all the evidence points to the person who we all think did this crime.
Reed claims Stites was killed by her fiancé, Jimmy Fennell, who was upset she was having an affair with Reed. An attorney for Fennell recently telling ABC News his client was not involved, saying not based on any of the credible evidence or physical evidence or forensic evidence. He called it a concoction of creative, brilliant lawyers trying to save a condemned man.